Hey everybody, it is time to talk about my month in reading. So today I'm going to tell you all about everything I read in August and everything I have planned for this month, which is September. In August, I didn't mean to do this necessarily, but it turns out I read 10 books in August. And as always, when you're talking about me, when I say I read 10 books in August, I mean that I both read and audiobooked 10 books in August. And as usual, my ratio is probably about 75% audio, 25% physical reading. But I don't really know how those ratios come out when I do what I call immersive reading, which is my favorite way to read, which is listening to the audiobook while reading with my eyes at the same time. That's what I love to do the most. But like I said, a lot of my reading time is audiobooks. Some of it, though, is physical reading. So we'll say in the month of August, I consumed 10 books. And I'm going to show them to you in no particular order. And I'm not going to lie, when it comes to my book of the month, like my favorite thing I read in August, I still haven't decided what it is. So you're going to find out when I find out. So hopefully going through these books will spark something for me. This is in no particular order, by the way. I read Vampiri, which is book number 2 of the Necroscope series. And I read Necroscope back in April and I really liked it. I liked the writing style. I liked the storytelling format. But most of all, this take on vampires and monsters and supernatural things is just really, really unique. I liked the first book and I think I liked this one even more. I wasn't crazy about the last, maybe quarter or maybe third of it, but the middle and the beginning I really, really, really liked. So I don't really give things star ratings, but I would say that I'm really, really liking this series and will continue. I'm not sure if it's a love yet, but I do really like it. So as far as I'm concerned, like that's a total win. I don't need to love, top 10 of all times, everything I read. But this was a solid read and it's something I do recommend, especially if you're into like taking, like I said, vampires and monsters and supernatural things to a totally different level and just something that's, I think, unique. I also read another book too, Star Wars Dark Force Rising. This is book 2 of the Thrawn trilogy. And guys, I loved it. It was super fun. I did this one. As you can see, my book has barely been cracked. I did this one almost only on audio, but these Star Wars audiobooks are so fun because there's one narrator, so it's not like a full cast graphic audio or anything, but it's one narrator who's very, very good, by the way. Like he does voices, like he sounds just like Han Solo, and he also does a really good Luke Skywalker, Admiral Akbar. Like he does really good voices, but beyond his good voices, there's also lots of sound effects. So if they're talking, like if it's C-3PO or R2-D2, they sound just like they do in the movies. And if they're shooting blasters or taking off in an X-Wing or whatever, the sound effects are just like in the movies. So it's very immersive and very fun. And that's probably one reason that I read so many books this month, is I chose some really fun ones that weren't necessarily short. But, this is a pretty quick read, but it's not like it's 200 pages. It's almost 500-page book. But man, they're so fun to read. And so you find yourself, if you do audio, especially with those Star Wars books, like I couldn't stop. It was like watching a movie. So yeah, those things are fast reads. I also read Midnight Tides, again, part of the Midnight Tides read-along on Mike's Book Reviews Discord server. So we've been reading a Malazan book one every other month approximately, and this month was Midnight Tides. I have not been super hot on this series so far. There have been parts of every book that I liked, but for the most part, I end up more frustrated than I do enjoying them. Midnight Tides was a little different for me. I still don't know if I liked it the most of any of them, because there were a few storylines in Dead House Gates that I really, really liked. But this book read the most like a typical novel, in my opinion. And I really liked a couple of the storylines, and they finally wrote a couple characters that I can get behind, and I'm like really interested to see what happens to them. So a lot of my complaints that I've had about Malazan all along, I still have most of those complaints, but this book was a pretty enjoyable read, and I'm still really looking forward to the next one, because apparently book 6 is when all the loose ends kind of come together and the story takes form, and that's really what I've been waiting for, is for a story to come out of all of this, all of these plot lines that are all over the place. So overall, I did like this, and it has me set up to being more hopeful and excited for the next book, which will be that will be an October read. All right, I read The Shining. You're gonna find out that this was a kind of Stephen King heavy month for me, but I was in a Stephen King mood this month, and I just could not get enough of it. So I read The Shining. This was my first time reading it, and I don't even know what to tell you guys. Like, it was so good. This is probably the scariest book I've ever read. I was telling some friends that, like, what Stephen King does better than anybody else is he curates this sense of dread. And if you're familiar with the movie, even though it's very different than the book, you're familiar with the basic storyline, the plot of The Shining. And so knowing what's coming, man, he does the perfect job of just setting it up from the beginning. Like, that sense of dread is very heavy throughout this whole book, but it doesn't make it dreadful to read. Like, it is a page turner if there ever was one. I read this in 2 days because it was such a good flow and such a page turner, so exciting that I couldn't stop reading it. But from the get-go, he really makes you invested in this family and truly paints somebody who ends up being a real monster, but the way he builds his character, you can't help but relate to the monster and really, understand where he's coming from, and just, I don't know, talk about character work. This book was awesome, and there were a couple parts, a couple ankle grabbing parts that just made me like, even while reading a book. And even through it and, Misery and Pet Sematary, which could be pretty scary as far as books go, none of them really gave me the true heebie-jeebies like this one did. So this might be the scariest book I've ever read. Really glad I finally got to it. All right, this book right here, Green Lights. This was kind of out of nowhere. I heard good things about it. I picked it up at Walmart one day because it was a good looking book with a cool dust jacket. And I flipped through and saw that it had a lot of pictures and things that he's written in his own hands, like little poetry and stuff like that. And then I saw that he narrates the audiobook, and I think that's cool. Like, he's such a great actor, and he has such a nice voice with, perfect timing and a really warm cadence that I was like, I would like to read a book that was narrated by him. And I don't typically read a lot of nonfiction these days, but this book was really good. Just a great memoir. He is a world-class storyteller. Like, talk about a true Renaissance man. Like, he has had a interesting life, and he's a very good storyteller. So if you're looking for a break from your typical genre, maybe want to venture out of fiction for a few days, this book was really fun. Again, I major thumbs up on the audiobook because he makes it a really fun, immersive experience. But you got to have the actual book too, so you can look at all the pictures of the stuff that he's referencing. Like, this guy is a hoot. So I definitely recommend this one. I loved it. Salem's Lot was another Stephen King book that I read this month. It is, of course, Stephen King's take on a classic vampire story. So tonally very different than the Necroscope books. And I loved it. Of course, Stephen King doing what he does best. Immaculate character work, doing small town better than anybody else in the game. Coming from the perspective of an author, which, is kind of his MO, but it works. Somehow he makes it work every time. Again, I think I read this in 2 or 3 days. I couldn't stop because it's just so hard to pace yourself on a Stephen King book because they just read so easily and they're so immersive. So another home run for Stephen King. This was my first time reading Jurassic Park. I did this with Mike's read along. Mike's book reviews on his Discord server is doing a, maybe not every month, but it's a reread for him, and for a lot of us, it is a first time discovering Michael Crichton's works. So we're reading them chronologically, and this month we did Jurassic Park, and it was so good, you guys. I am a big, longtime fan of the Jurassic Park franchise, and I think I said this last month, but I love all the Jurassic movie. Even the bad ones, I love them all. So I had high expectations for this because you know what they say, like the movie may be good, but the book is better. That's usually the case. And I just couldn't imagine Jurassic Park being any better, but the book is better than the movie. I love the movie so much, but man, the book was so good. The character work was awesome. And man, like there's just way more here than made it to the film. Of course, like you can't put an entire book into a film. We know how that works. So a solid adaptation, very, very fun movie. One of my favorites, but the book was, I mean, it was a trip, and I love the way the characters are written in the book. I read this at the very beginning of the month, and I read it quick because you guys know me and my Rhaenyra. I just gulp it down. I can't get it enough of it. So this book was only 350 pages, and I did this one on audio, and I read it in, you know, I think 2 or 3 settings. It went quick, it isn't long, and I can't say enough about the series, you guys. This one is called The Rose and Thorn, and it is a prequel book. It's part of the Rhaenyra Chronicles, so it's a prequel to Rhaenyra Revelations, and I just can't get enough Royce and Hadrian. So anytime I have a chance to go back to that world and hang out with these guys, I am all about it. So I was really glad I was able to get this one in at the beginning of the month. And the last thing in my stack of 10 books, oh, I guess I don't have all 10. I also read Blood Meridian. I'm going to talk about Billy Summers, but I read Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy. I do not have a physical copy of the book. I did it all on audio, and I don't have much to say for it other than the fact that I read it. It was a strange experience. It was, I mean, I am a fan of grimdark. That's a subgenre of fantasy, and this is not a fantasy book, but I was telling some people that if you think about it, Westerns are the perfect platform for this term we like, grimdark, because that's what the Wild Wild West really was. You know, that's a grim, dark time. And even the good guys were kind of bad, and the bad guys were bad. And, you know, everybody was just, you know, survival only, out for blood. That's a great setting for, you know, a really grim novel. And I was really excited for this gritty, dark Western. And it was gritty and it was dark, but I think it was too much for me. And I didn't know that I'd ever say that, but it wasn't character driven. There wasn't much plot. It was just a lot of hopelessness and death and murder and killing and just bad. So it's supposed to be like one of these great novels that everyone has to read in their lifetime. It's very philosophical, and I could appreciate it. I'm glad that I read it. But I just don't think either. I'm not sure if I just didn't like it or if I didn't get it. But anyway, that's all I have to say about that. It was an experience I had, and I just don't think it was for me. The last book I read, which was actually one of the first books I read of the whole month, was Billy Summers. This was a new release by Stephen King. This is a assassin thriller. So out of his wheelhouse, but I'm glad he tried something new because I thought it was a hit. It's not going to be something that probably stays. I mean, I think I've only read 11 or 12 Stephen King novels at this point, so I don't know that it will stay in my top 10, but man, I really enjoyed it. Tonally, it takes a big shift from the first half to the second half, and I was one that preferred the, you know, acts 2 and 3 over the first act. But I've heard it both ways, that people were disappointed with the shift it took. I kind of preferred the back end to the front end. But either way, I mean, it was a solid book from Stephen King that I'm really glad I read. And I was glad that I got to read it on release day, like with the rest of the real Stephen King fans. This was my first time experiencing a Stephen King release day. So that was great. It's a beautiful book, and I'm happy to own it, and I'm glad I read it. Okay, when it comes to my book of the month, as you guys see, like Blood Meridian was a little bit of a miss for me, but otherwise I kind of liked everything I read. But if I had to pick one, which is what book of the month means, to me, it's between Jurassic Park and The Shining. I think I'm going to give it to Jurassic Park because I was just so, I did have high expectations, but I was still pleasantly surprised with how well it worked in book format. So I'm going to go with Jurassic Park for my book of the month. But I'm telling you, The Shining is a close second. And honestly, if I had to pick a third, it might even be this Matthew McConaughey book. I really liked it. Okay, so I'm going to put these all back over here, and let's go over real quick what I'm planning to do for September. So over at Discord, we are doing SciFi September, and I don't think anyone's planning to read only sci-fi all month long, but I am making an effort to weave in a little bit more sci-fi. So I have 6 books planned, but if everyone's reading sci-fi and I kind of get the bug, I may switch it up a little bit, add some more sci-fi. But here's what I have planned for the month. And it's kind of funny because if I look at my stack, other than this little bit of sci-fi that I have in here, the rest of it is completely dictated by library holds that I've been waiting on for a long time that are now available. So the first thing I'm reading sci-fi wise is Dark Matter by Blake Crouch. I've heard nothing but good things about this book. And based on the premise and how I know it's supposed to be like really action-packed and fast-paced, I'm really looking forward to this one. I am going to jump back into Hitchhikers Guide to the Galaxy and that collection of books, and I'll be reading, excuse me, I will be reading at least The Restaurant at the End of the Universe and maybe a couple more because these are pretty short, but I had such fun reading Hitchhiker's Guide that I am excited to keep going with those. Now this one's kind of coming out of left field for me, but I put a library hold on this audiobook. I mean, maybe even close to a year ago. Like, I'm not joking about how long I've been waiting for this audiobook. And I never spent an Audible credit on it or went out of my way to get it because I was like, I'll just wait. And whenever the hold comes through, that's when I'll read it. So I'm finally going to read this book, The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. And this was really popular, I think, in like 2019, probably into 2020. This was like the hot book. I haven't read it. I have no expectations. I honestly don't even know what it's about. I just know that it was popular and it's supposed to be fantasy, I think. And I finally have a library hold ready. So I'm gonna read it this month. What I'm reading right now, my first book of September, is Promise of Blood, and this is book 1 of the Powder Mage series. And this is a series that I've been excited to read basically ever since I decided to dive back into reading fantasy. This was a popular and well talked about series when I was discovering BookTube and really started getting a good idea of what all is even out there. This book and this series has been on my ever-growing TBR, but I finally am reading it with some buddies. My friend Jane we have been planning to read this together for a while now, and it just constantly was like, oh, I kind of forgot that we said we'd do that this month, or, well, what do you think about next month? But this month, September 2021, we are reading it together with a couple of other buddies, and I am about 40% in right now, and I really like it so far. Dune. So this is one that is not dictated by my library holds, but a bunch of us on Discord are doing some are doing a first time read, and for me and many others, it will be a reread. I'm reading Dune. So Dune, the movie, is coming out in November. I can't even tell you how excited I am for that. I read this book in the fall of last year and loved it. And as soon as I read it, I thought that is a book I will reread. Like, there is so much more I need to glean from that. I enjoyed the story. I love the setting. The characters were awesome, but I feel like I only skimmed the surface. So I can't wait to read this again and get more from it. And also just plain prepping for the movie, getting on that hype train. And then this is another library hold I have coming through. And I was gonna take a month off of Stephen King since I am worried about burning out, but Dune is one that has been recommended to me several times. I just got this hardcover for $6 at a used bookstore, and then the library hold came through, so I thought, this is fate. I'm reading Dune this month. So that is only 6 books, but there are some big books in there. I don't know if I will have as much time to read this month as I had last month, but I'm really excited about all of them. So what did you read in August? What was your book of the month, and what are you most excited about for September? Please drop in the comments and let me know. Have a great day, and hopefully I'll talk to you soon.